This is Film Center, your number one show for real entertainment industry news. No fluff, all facts. Now, here are your anchors, Derek Johnson II and Nicholas Killian.
Hey everyone, welcome to Film Center News. My name's Derek Johnson II.
I'm Nicholas Killian.
And today we are here with the company Neomyth. We're here with
David Moreno.
and
Electronica Zero.
hello. How you doing?
Electronica Zero.
Yes.
Where did you come up with
Her name is
that
way
name?
cooler than my name.
Came up with the early 2000s. Came up with a handle name for my online persona.
Is that like an AIM handle or?
Is that
like an AIM handle. What I was
It's like-
talking about,
it's like-
American Online.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I started with that, and the name came up when I was watching the movie Hackers. I guess
okay.
the guy whose name was Cool
Hackers.
Zero. I
Yeah.
really loved Cool Zero, and I love electronica music. I just put the two together.
nice?
Yeah.
Neomyth, they make you make comic books, right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Born in Los Angeles, California. Lived here my whole life.
An actual Los Angeles person instead of someone who
An actual
moves-
Angelino,
An
which is a
Angelino.
very rare sighting here in LA.
Yeah. Grew up in the Huntington Park area,
Okay.
Latino base. Then went to Cal State LA and graduated with a BA in art education. And from there, after that, I did some teaching a little bit. But then I wanted to follow comic books because that's what got me to draw.
Can you talk about what led you to the inspiration of wanting to do that?
The funny thing is, I never liked drawing to begin with when I was a kid. I hated drawing.
Really?
I hated drawing. I hated coloring. I was scribbly. I didn't care because I would get bored very easily. I had no aspirations of becoming an artist as a kid. But there's something about storytelling that I like. I started off writing my own little short stories. I even wanted to become a pro wrestler.
Really?
And I was trying to get
Who's,
in shape for that.
who's a wrestler that you admired when you were young?
Hulk Hogan,
Hulk Hogan.
I was a-
Yeah.
You wanted to become a wrestler because you saw it on TV?
yeah, and I'm like, that looks pretty cool. It's like it's action. I wasn't a sports kid either. I didn't play sports or follow sports, but for some reason, wrestling caught my attention.
Because it had a storyline to it.
It most likely, yeah, because it was very dramatic. Who growing up in the '80s with pro wrestling, that you see all the big events.
It was incredible.
Not so polished the way it is now. It's very commercialized,
It's
but
very commercialized
it's
now.
super commercialized. So I got into that, and I was like, I'll start training, working out. But then the doctor said, "Sorry, your spine is out of alignment, so you can't do that."
Well,
You
like
have scoliosis?
That's what they said, but I don't believe it because I don't feel anything from it. But who knows down the road?
Did
So
they
he
like-
could have just been hating. He
Yeah.
could have just.
He could have been, hey, that could have been his dream.
Yeah.
And you were going to pursue that dream.
And he was like,
So
you know what?
Yeah.
There's too many people
can't
in
do
here
that.
pursuing their dreams.
Well, the funny thing is, when I told my friend that was in pro wrestling, he's like, "Well, why don't you jump on? We can make a deal." It's like the doctor says my spine is out of alignment. So don't worry about that. So is that guy over there. But I'm like, I'm already doing this drawing thing. And what happened was, I was halfway through high school, and
Okay.
there was this show called on The Max.
Max, he's a purple superhero, and I love that show. It is awesome.
Yeah, and I wasn't even gonna watch that show until my cousin, who was younger, said, "Can you please record it for me? It's like past his bedtime." I'm like, "All right, clean my room tomorrow and I'll do it." So I was never gonna watch it, but I watched it, and just something compelled me after I recorded it. I'm like, "Huh, that was a pretty cool show. Like dark."
What was it about it that compelled you so much?
Probably the art style itself, because it had a very grimy look, but it's very unique, and it had a lot of watercolor elements. It was a good adaptation of the comic book when I found out that it was a comic book, and it looked pretty much shot for shot. The next day, I was like, I just kept watching it over and over again. I recorded
same
it.
episode?
The same episode, episode 1, and I was just rewinding it, and I'm like, I paused it at a certain frame, and I started drawing it. I just got a lined sheet of paper and a cheap Bic pen that you get from a dollar store, and just started hatching it out. I'm like, this looks like the one from the TV. Hey, because before I didn't like drawing. I just didn't.
But you
Just
were
happened.
compelled to just try to imitate it.
Right.
What switched? What switched in your brain?
I think it was just the fact that I did something that I never did before, and it did it well.
Oh, like matching that image with something
Right.
that it's so interesting because the first episode of the Max, you have not only 2D, there's some live action cops that are in it when he's in the backseat or whatever,
Yes.
right? So when you're looking at this grimy art style, obviously you had seen cartoons and other stuff before, right? But it was the uniqueness of the Max that made you say, "Oh, let me see if I can do this."
And the way they set it up, dark, grimy,
Was it a
lives in a
challenge
box.
to yourself to see if I could do it, or was it with just genuine
just
curiosity?
pure drive to, I don't know why, but I'm just drawing this. Like, it's just, something in me was just sparking.
Compelled you
Right.
to.
Is that what made you say that? Oh, I'm gonna keep doing this.
I thought at first took it to my parents. They're like, "Hey, this is pretty good." So I guess having that
Positive
positive
reinforcement.
reinforcement, and it's not about wrestling questions or anything.
You're like, oh, he's asking about
par-
wrestling.
How did so when did you decide? Oh, okay, I'm gonna be an artist. What was the point?
I would say that I started it as a hobby 1st and my parents encouraged it because, hey, he's not out there causing trouble or getting into trouble with drugs, a 90s kid. So sure, here's some more paper. So
Here's
it's
some more
just-
paper and pencil, and just don't go outside and do something crazy.
Yeah. And I found out, oh, this is a comic book. And I'm like, oh, I want to go buy. That's where my comic book addiction started. Dad, take me to the comic book store. It's Saturdays. Yeah, better than an allowance.
And what would you say is your favorite comic book
Or one of your favorites.
or
Well,
franchise?
I would say that the Max is my inspirational. This is what brought me to the game. Now, what kind of drove me to become better in my art was Spawn, Tom McFarlane's Spawn.
Oh my God, Spawn on HBO
and
was so good.
I would say issue number 24. Where
Why
just
specifically that issue?
the griminess, once again, the style. is
You
just
really
the
like the
texture.
grimy.
Is that the one with the? Okay, I think the Dominator's in that one. Am I wrong?
Yeah, well, I think if I remember correctly, the Redeemer just beat him, and his costume's about to metamorph into the next stage, where he was all spikier and.
Yeah.
I just love the griminess because I was already starting to copy comic books. I look at a page and I'm like, I was a pretty good copier. I would just follow the contours and I was training myself how to draw without knowing.
And then, what stage of your life are you in at this point?
I am making my own because I feel like I have to keep storytelling. I did want to follow like what any kid back then. I want to be in comics. I want to go to DC or Marvel.
So, were you just graduating high school, going into college?
By that point, I was just graduating high school, but I was like, how do I get into comics? And somebody suggested, you got to go to school and like brush up on some things. Like I was told, get some plenty of physical training, life drawing, but also graphic design. And I heard Todd McFarlane in an interview once saying he graduated as a graphic designer. And I looked it up and I'm like, we were still doing stuff by hand. This is like right before my college got funding in the arts department for computers, so I was still doing stuff by hand.
Right.
And then the computer showed up, and I'm like, oh boy, it looks like I have to learn how to use a computer.
It's a whole other-
How was that
other
process?
wheelhouse.
That was interesting. I was a little worried, though, because I never used a computer except for maybe just typing out a report in some English class, just using their Word files, but never a Photoshop class. I think it was Photoshop 5.0.
Photoshop
Whoa.
5.0. So nowadays, do you still doing it by hand, or do you like doing it on the computer?
I like both. I still love traditional, pencil, paper, pen, but I use the computer to refine my lines, probably do rough sketches that I would like, all right, how would I handle this a different way? Just not worried about messing up.
So this is, I should say, sentiment in the industry right now, especially with comics, that some things are kind of looking the same. And it was like the Max is drawn in such a way where it's very unique. You know what I'm saying? And I would also say the same thing for the way that Spawn was drawn. So it's these more distinctive, gritty styles. And if there weren't for those styles, you might not have been as interested. Is there? What do you think about the comic books becoming more and more standard? Because there's a sentiment that some are starting to look the same.
I think that happens every 15 to 20 years because you have young up-and-coming artists. They're seeing this over and over again, and they start to adapt that particular style, and it starts to get a little watered down.
But like you said, you looked at a style, you were inspired by it, but then you didn't copy it, right? You were just something that you were inspired by.
I copied it as a teenager.
Yeah, but that's when you were like learning.
Learning.
It's different when you're producing it. So why do you think they're producing some things that might look similar, that might look quote unquote standard? Because of time and money, or
I would say time and money, and just people have to draw the house style. There is a house style. Who's ever the hot artist,
You have to
leads the
learn
way.
how to draw in that style.
Just that style, which is why there is a lot of artists that, well, I don't want to work for the big companies because I have to draw like that person over there, and then they would get lost in the big machine. Now that's
Right.
understandable. I would tell any young artist, okay, what do you want to do with your art? Do you want to make money, be famous? Do you just want to make money just to eat, or do you just want to draw because you love it? And what do you love to do? There are
Because
some people-
those things are going to decide how much money you're going to make, where you're going to work, where you're going to end up in life.
right now I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, I want to do what I want to draw, or I love the classic characters, just the ones that are out there, and it is commercialized. I would love it when they would say, Moreno, why don't you draw for us? That would be great, but I'm going to have to draw it in my style. I might not get to pick that, though.
They may say, "Oh, we want you to tailor." Even if you're drawing, let's say they ask you, like, if Marvel's like, "Hey, we want you to make an Iron Man story," they're like,
Yeah.
"Okay, there's still probably some certain guidelines they want you to follow."
Okay, Tony Stark is going to look like Robert Downey Jr. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Or this is how we want you to draw by the character design, and that's understandable.
So, who are some of your favorite artists?
There's a variety. Sam Keith is the number one for me. Todd McFarlane, let's see, Greg Capullo, Dan Panosian, Alex Ross, and it starts to range more and more after that.
What is the reason why you like those artists so much?
They're able to pick a moment in time and just make it look exciting. It's very classical. I would say that I am classically trained because I did study Da Vinci, all the Renaissance
Right.
artists.
So, where did you end up going to college whenever you decided, oh, okay, this is something maybe that I would want to do?
Did you just choose like a random place, or you?
I will admit I was a C student. I barely passed high school because I want to say I was never diagnosed for dyslexia. So whatever was art related, I gravitated towards. Whatever
Right.
was math, I'm bored.
Yeah.
But I would be interested in like geometry or something, and that's useful.
Angles.
Shapes
stuff.
and angles and
angles.
colors, yeah.
Or history. I'm a big history buff.
Oh, me too.
I love anything to deals with Renaissance or even the Napoleonic Wars, stuff like that. Just
Right.
all this awesome history and the characters that
Right.
just
it
make
was
up
so
those,
dangerous, they just marooned them on an island.
or even then prehistory stuff. I love just finding out this stuff. That's why I was drawn into stuff like Conan the Barbarian.
How does that stuff inspire you?
In your art,
I believe that it's a very driving force because it's primal. What's one of the oldest things of communication? Drawing on caves and just communicating. So this feeling, and it probably connects to the pro wrestling stuff because what are you seeing? Two characters going at it in battle. It's exciting, and I used to take action figures when I was still training, just zoom in and out with just holding him up in the light a certain way, trying to mimic what I would see on paper. And it's
like position them in a way that you're like, "Oh, okay, cool. I think that
Yeah.
this is the image that I want to see."
And-
when it comes to designing like sections of a comic book, because it's not like each page is only one picture, right?
Right.
How do you know your proportions? I have to say, "Oh, this is 3 panels here. This is 2 panels here. This is I want to stack this one here with this," because they're just so different nowadays.
It's all about the beats of what's going on. If it's the page is more descriptive, then every writer writes description a different way, depending on what they studied. I would say sometimes a writer might say, "Oh, there's going to be like 6 panels," and I'm like, "No, you can do this in 3."
And simplify, yeah.
Or they'll be like, "Oh, you're going to love this. This is going to be easy. This is only 2 panels." I'm like, "No, you should do this 5."
Do you find some writers are easier to work with than others?
I think I found the easiest one to work with is my wife because we're pretty much in each other's head.
I was trained.
Wow.
You were trained?
Where were you trained in your writing this?
Before I would write anything, I would just write my own stuff. But Dave pretty much taught me how comics work and brought me into the whole industry because before I would just be like, "Oh, okay, I could write this into a story, or let me see what I can do with this." Look at a movie and it's like, how would I rewrite that, or how would I look at it a different perspective?
How would I execute this scene? Stuff like
Exactly. But Dave turned me into comics, and I was like, "Oh, this is now even more interesting. Let's break this down into pictures."
So when did you two decide, "Oh, we're gonna start a company together"? Because there's a lot of people who they're in relationships and they can't really. Just because you're in a relationship with someone doesn't mean that you can
wanna
do
work with
business
them.
together
Right.
and stuff like that. How did you two know that this was a good fit?
It goes back to our history, our first story, where 2 friends were bringing us together to work on a project for a video game. And they said, "You can do some pictures and do some of the story, and we're gonna bring this guy that we know, and he's totally better than all of us. Like, he pulls us all out of the water, and he's like a great artist, and you gotta meet him. You gotta meet him. I was a flaky person, still flaky, but David was gonna fire me on day one
Because they asked me, she's slow a little. She takes a while to write. I'm like, you want me to fire her? Okay,
I'll do it.
I'll do it. I don't know her.
Yeah, I have no emotion towards her.
But
I never
then
met
after
them.
talking to her a little bit, I was like, oh, she's such a nice person. I'm not gonna fire her.
Yeah, and then he saw the ideas that I had for the story, and he was like, wow, we could totally make this into a comic book.
But originally it was gonna be a video game, but everybody else flaked out. This was just college kids trying to make
And then
something.
Dave fired everybody.
Then I fired everybody.
Until the last person he fired himself.
Every artist has their own particular style, their own particular process. Could you walk through your particular process?
How about specifically on character design? Because everyone goes through character designs in a different way. I've even been someone on the show talking about math. Oh, how you look at your character? He's, I like to use like math, and I was like, I don't understand what that means. And he's like, if someone has a certain number of tails, I might add them or subtract them. I'm like, seriously? How do you do your character design? How do you approach it?
Definitely, it depends what the script dictates. If it was a client, that I would ask him, okay, do you have a certain look you want? Do you have anything pre-done already, or do you have any magazine covers? Any actors you wanted to
Like
look
references.
like? References, exactly. In fact, I would tell them, if you have your own characters, I won't even charge you for the designs because you already came up with it. But I'm like, okay, if it's a fantasy story, what period would you like it to be? If it's power fantasies, then it's going to be whatever. If it's a historical piece, all right, 15th, 16th century, okay, I'm going to go research that and research costumes. I did take, when I finally reached Cal State LA, I actually took one history of costume design class. I was the only guy there.
I used to make costumes.
DJ
Actually,
used to be a costumer.
Yeah, that's why I came before I was a writer. I came out to do
Yeah.
costumes, and I think there's such a lack of appreciation of that research. You know what I'm saying? There's
Right.
so many people who are like, oh, I'm just gonna just dive right into it. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but when you do a little research, you can add a whole bunch of details that makes it authentic and unique at the same time. When you're doing your research, is there a certain place that you're like, okay, this is where I'm going first, or does it depend on the story?
It depends really what's going on, and if it's action or if it's just simple dialogue. All right, what kind of food were they eating at the period? Everything. I like to stick to details. But if it's just full-blown fantasy, there's no real reference. It's all a little bit of reference. Then I'm like, okay, I can make it whatever I want, depending on what the script dictates. Characters is always based on what are they going to do down the road. Are they left-handed or right-handed? That's always I throw that one in there, surprised by that kind of question.
How is that relevant?
Not everybody's right-handed. And I would have to draw that, especially if they're in combat.
How do you? You draw like the sword in the left hand. I was about to just ask. I don't know how you communicate.
Yeah. And if you ask somebody that does combat, that throws them off. Or like in Rocky 1, Southpaws. I don't want you messing with those Southpaws. They'll mess you up.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking differently, and that's the little tiny details quiet details that I like to put in.
Are people who you're drawing as ambidextrous, they're like dual wielders or something?
Yeah, they would have two knives and they'll be like boom, boom. Actually, a movie like I think it was called King Arthur back in the early 2000s. Lancelot was ambidextrous. He was using two blades.
Are you talking about the Clive Owen King Arthur?
Yes. The one who played Lancelot, he was ambidextrous.
Right.
So he fought ambidextrous. And I was like, that's interesting because that's somebody that's just, they're going to, anyway. So that's even more impressive.
Do you feel that people overlook all of that intense research that you have to do?
I would say some, depending on the level of seriousness. Even then from the writer, I would say there's some writers that I want them to be 5'11", right-handed. They have a scar here because it's in their hyper-realistic imagination. Or they'll say, Dave, go at it. You can do whatever you want with this character.
Which one do you prefer?
I would say somewhere in the middle because I would like to say, okay, where do you want to
You
contribute?
need a starting point.
Yeah, because starting from nothing is it's a lot harder than people think. Because then I'm building the universe for them, and I'm like, are you sure you want this?
Because you don't know if they're going to like it or not.
Right.
They're telling you, hey, do whatever you want, but then whenever you give them whatever they want, are they really going to like it?
Right.
Do you find that the images that you draw, like how you draw them, affects the way you color them too? Or is that really more of a shading thing?
No, actually, it does. It is important. I don't color. I know how to color, but I'd rather have somebody
A colorist color.
colorist that knows what they really, because it comes down to practically coloring is like chemistry, and you have to think of the atmosphere, time, when the sun's setting a certain time, and then if there's a haze, if there's supposed to be a haze and it's a battle and there's smoke, it affects color. Even a rainy day affects tonal stuff. So I'd rather have somebody that's super good at it and just let them handle that. But I always have that in mind because over time I learned my art at first was very hatchy. There was a lot of cross hatching.
So for people who might not, because we do have a lot of people who are in the industry who listen to the show, but for people who aren't, what does that mean exactly?
I'm using a lot of cross hatching, which is I'm letting my inks do the rendering, but because now there's coloring has advanced so much from the 70s and 80s, the colors have gotten an upgrade in their tools. So you have to give them that more leeway for them to render certain things. Now I could still have a very hatchy style, but I got to keep in mind, all right, leave room for the colorist so that way they could
they can shine.
Can you speak to how it used to be in the 70s and 80s and how it's upgraded so much now for the audience at home?
I was born in 79, so I only got the tail end of things, but from what I've studied, colorists were using markers and papers before. Like they were just old school coloring directly on the artwork.
Straight up coloring.
Right.
Break out the Crayola. Well, not
Right.
Crayola exactly, but you know what I'm saying. Coloring by hand.
They'll be coloring by hand and on paper. Then that eventually started changing when the technology started upgrading. You had Pantone and companies like that just digitally printing stuff. The press was changing. Back in the 70s, people were hand cranking their comics. They would get a little hand crank, one sheet, and then put it together, staple
Really?
it. Then the 80s, it started upgrading. And around the 90s, like when I started taking classes, we had to learn, okay, in reality you're coloring, it's going to be different when you put it in the computer, or if you create it in the computer. You got to keep in mind you got to turn the red, green, and blue to CMYK, and then because it prints, the computer, you can do all this wonderful colors in the computers, but in reality when you're printing it, the ink doesn't take those exact colors, so you have to adjust.
Do you have to use certain printers?
Nowadays, it's now because of laser printing. You could really, it's actually gotten cheaper to color because the technology has just
Has upgraded so much.
and even then the technology's come to a point where we don't really need paper in the industry. But I like using it because I like the feeling of it because I grew up on it. I believe that in 2 generations there won't be any paper anymore in comics as far as the production. Mm-hmm. Like you look at Japanese anime, they don't use cell animation anymore.
No.
It's all on computers now.
Yeah.
And even then, I would think that the bigger companies, you're drawing on a big tablet just for production's sake. It's all about speed as far as the productions.
Do you find that the techniques that you honed back in the 90s, do you find them to be an advantage nowadays?
Yes, because if the technology failed, I can just whip out some paper
And still get it done.
still get it done.
Because the reason why I ask is because my dad's an engineer, right? And the way he grew up was just drawing it, right? The advantage for him is he can just draw it whatever he needs out in the field instead of having to go do it on the computer and waiting for it. Is that basically the same thing in your field?
Right. If I worked on it hard enough, I could just do it just single-handedly like the old way, and it won't be any different. It might take a little longer, but having that advantage could help to the point where, okay, our machines are broken. What do we do? We're going to keep working.
But if you don't know how to draw
Then
like you do,
Yeah, then
Do you
then you're
do you
done.
still design on paper sometimes and then transfer it to digital, or is it like just design digitally?
I would say something like basic graphic designs where you're doing lettering and shapes. Let's say for a sign, like a Starbucks sign or something, or I like to go into the computer because I could just take the shape and manipulate it. But it's better to do it on paper because it's analog. You're manipulating the shape. What feels right? What's sharp? What's soft?
You're more in tune
Right.
with the actual art itself.
So by that means, that's how I was trained, because I started graphic design just before the computers were standard in colleges.
so you still had computer labs. Is there anything that we might not know that is super crucial to what you do that people It wouldn't even cross their minds.
I would say you have to really be confident in your line art when you're drawing, because I've noticed whenever I've seen YouTubers, a lot of people do it, but they don't realize they're doing it. When you're seeing these speed drawings and you're seeing the process and fast forward, yeah, you notice they undo the lines all the time. And all they have to do really is just, let's say you want to do a curve line.
Yeah.
You use anchor points, click one side, click on the other, curve it, and you're done. But people want to draw that line so badly digitally that if it doesn't feel right, they undo it. And I noticed that slows down. It might slow it down by a couple of seconds, but your mind wants it
To be perfect. Yeah.
But even then, real art isn't perfect, because that line, if you zoom in, it's going to be crooked regardless. I've zoomed in on my own line art. Oh, look at all this crusty edges. No, that's just ink. That's just the ink naturally on the paper.
And the crazy part is that as artists, you're very, judgmental on yourself. But then some of the audiences don't even notice it. They'll have no clue, they can't even see the mistakes that you might see in the first place.
Right.
So then it's okay. Not that you don't want it to be the best of your abilities, but at the same time, like you said, okay, does it have to be perfect? No.
I would say it depends on if I worked hours on a piece. I personally go crazy if there was like a little mistake. I'm like, or let's say I accidentally left a little tiny dot in that's not supposed to be there. Let's say by splatter or something.
That would bother you a lot.
That would irk me because I know it's there. That's a personal thing, because editors should be seeing that anyways. And so if you're working for a bigger company, you have a whole assembly line of people just looking at your work. It's slightly tougher when you're on your own to see little tiny mistakes, which is it's valuable to say if you got some friends that are trusting and are straight up, they'll like check out your work. Say, hey, does this look right? Does this? And like I tell my wife, hey, does this arm look right?
Right,
Yeah.
Get a fresh pair of eyes.
Yeah. And what is it that you say?
I'm the worst judge or the worst editor the editor of your nightmares. They'll be like, hey, Dave, you know what? That angle doesn't look right. It looks like you're having a tough time. Do you mind doing it again?
And I could be done with a complete piece of the whole page, and I just rip it up and start over.
The whole page is ripped up. Like
You do the whole thing and start over?
Yeah.
like 4 or 5. He's like in 6 panels, and then one of the panels doesn't look right. And I tell this to Dave. I go, "You're gonna hate me for this." And then he looks at it. He picks it up, tears that thing apart, and it has to start all over.
Yeah, but then
It breaks my heart too.
I have
Everything
learned
else looks
to,
great.
I have learned to calm down, and I'll just Photoshop that I'll just, because I'm so used
You
to
edit it instead of starting over.
Yeah, because I've noticed that if it's a small thing, I'm like, I'll just cut a piece of Bristol board and just scan that and then put it in later. But because I came from just having editors look at my work, I want to show pristine pages. So there's that old school kind of thinking, which isn't bad, but it's like a little hindering because production, I got to get this done. If we're near a deadline, I won't tear it up. I'll just have to bite the bullet. I'm like, all right, I'll leave this page out, or I'll put the page, I'll cut this out, put another piece, and I can do that on the computer too. I've done that. It's just if it's a pose, let's say a power pose, you have 2 characters in action, and I don't have the root of it, which is the gesture drawing itself. What I usually start off with gesture drawings, just getting that motion. If the motion is incorrect, then the whole piece is incorrect, because that is the root of it. All right, if I'm going to get that arm right, I have to do it completely over. Or if that twist isn't proper anatomy, then I have to. The problem is in the root of the drawing. So,
The problem's all the way back in the beginning. It's really great to have you on the show. Is there any way that the people can follow you?
you could follow me on Instagram, the 35 at Gmail. You could also follow me on thesapphireDirective.com.
thesapphireDirective.com.
And on Facebook with the same name, The Sapphire Directive.
Wow.
Dope. I really appreciate you coming out. Is there any advice that you would give people who want to get started in doing what you're doing, or maybe who would look up to you?
I would say if you have stories to tell, drawings, do it and do it the best that you can. Throw everything you got. If you're looking to get into the professional DC Marvel, keep trying, but understand that you will have to adapt to whatever the house style is, and you have to push your own career once you're past that. Meaning you're not going to draw for them forever. It's like pro wrestling. You're there for a little time, but make it everything you got and then push yourself outside.
Learn everything you can.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, and we appreciate it. My name's Derek Johnson II,
I'm Nicholas Killian.
and we're here with
David Moreno.
Ann,
Electronica Zero.
and we'll see you next time.
Thank
See
you
ya.
very much.
Thank you.
This has been Film Center on Comic-Con Radio. Check out our previous episodes at ComicConRadio.com. You can follow the show at Film Center News on all major social media platforms. Tune in next Wednesday for a fresh update. Until next time, this has been Film Center.
Hey, do you like anime and manga? Nick and I are big fans of the genre.
Yeah, we recently discovered a manga named Tamashi. It's written and created by Ryan McCarthy, and it recently just came out with its 10th volume.
Now, Tamashi is an isekai about a girl who gets transported to another world called the Ancient Lands. She gains mysterious powers and must fight demons and monsters to find her way home.
Check it out on Amazon, Blurb, and get a physical copy at RyanMcCarthyProductions.com.